Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Survivor 45 following episode 4, and we obviously got a pretty interesting episode here. We got our first tribe swap in a couple of years, which is crazy to think about, but I guess Jeff finally got the message here. And obviously that changes up the game to a degree, but we also got a pretty big episode for certain players that I'll be talking about more in a moment. But there are 15 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 15, we have the boot from this week, and here we have Shawn Edwards. And I feel like this was largely to be expected here, both from an editing and from a gameplay standpoint, where from an editing standpoint, I feel like it was pretty clear that Shawn was not being set to win. I feel like a lot of his content was pretty surface level, and obviously he got a visibility spike here, but not in a positive way. Like, he even got dodo music early on in the episode when he was talking about being at the bottom. It just made it clear to me that he just wasn't getting his way. He even was the one to say that he was hoping for a swap, only for him to get pretty much screwed here by ending up on a 4-1 Reba majority here, with him being the one original Lulu member. And yes, while we did see some stuff like his relationship with J Maya, I feel like J Maya was someone that was pretty unlikely to get her way here, considering she's been pretty under-edited in general, and also the fact that she was talking so much about the fact that sefue had an idol, completely buying the lie that she had been told in the last episode, but we'll get more to that in a moment. But all that's to say that I didn't really feel like Shawn was going to be super long here, and obviously it didn't help that he ended up quitting the game at Tribal Council, and I feel like that whole situation is pretty weird, where on one hand, Shawn himself seemed to think that he was going to be the boot here, and that he did everything in his power to be the boot here by throwing his vote onto D, and in general, just him coming off as a sore loser. But it also seemed like he actually was going to have the votes to stay here, where the tribe seemed to be on board with blindsiding sefue based off what Shawn himself has said after the fact, and also what Jeff said on the On Fire podcast. So I feel like in general, it was a very peculiar situation here, but he's out of the game now, and that really sucks. If you haven't already, join the Discord server. That way you can give Bryce your condolences. He is just devastated right now. But the one upside to all this is that this is proof that the season is not spoiled. So everything that I say moving forward is coming out of my own mouth and based purely off my own opinions. So I guess you gotta take the wins when you can. But obviously, Shawn's gone now, which is why he's here at number 15. And before we continue, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Russell Muscle TV, who I'm partnering up with this season to promote Idle Plays. Idle Plays is an online shop where you can purchase Survivor puzzles so you can practice them and be just like Carson from Survivor 44. We got all different selections here, including the fire puzzle, the snake to the top puzzle, the 5-piece puzzle that Spencer solved in 5 seconds from Survivor Cambodia, and more. If you want to take home Survivor puzzles made by superfans for superfans, feel free to click the link in the description and start shopping now. And with that, there are 14 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win based off their editing current game position. But at number 14, we have someone that didn't really move down too much, but it's more so other people moving up that caused them to fall this low. But here we have sefue. And I feel like sefue was obviously not in the best spot here, where despite him coming in like with this Reba majority and him talking about being Reba strong, which is really the bulk of his content here, he obviously comes very close to being taken out here, where, again, if Jeff and the exit interviews are to be believed, he would have been the target here had Shawn not quit the game, which is pretty bad on its own. But even outside of that, I feel like it was a kind of negative episode for him, where most of his content does come during the scramble and him being Reba strong. And I feel like that one scene of him talking with the other Rebas, while it has the camera like showing that downward angle of him and the machete, just came off as really foreboding to me. And if sefue had been the boat here, I feel like that would have been a very clear giveaway there. But obviously he didn't. He's still here. But with that said, there's nothing really positive about his edit, and I feel like there's not really much to say about him in terms of his winning chances, which is why he's here number 14. Now we're moving on to number 13, and we have someone that has kind of gone down a bit from the last time that I talked about them, but here we have Brando. And this was a really bad episode for Brando, simply because he gets no content here at all. And considering that this is supposed to be like this big turning point for him, like with this being the swap and him being on the most complex tribe dynamically, where he's supposed to be fighting for Emily Swingboat, the fact that we don't hear from him at all and it seems like Emily is purely siding with the original Reba side, is very bad for him. And it's obviously bad for Kendra too, but we'll get more to that soon. But I feel like for Brando in particular, it's such a bad look, considering that most of his content was about his game position beforehand. And the fact that we don't get any follow-up, any transformation, just makes it clear to me that he's probably not winning. And because of that, he is here number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and we have someone that I have been low on throughout most of the season. And here we have J Maya. And I did technically move her up here as she did get more content here, but it was mostly bad content where obviously she was shown bonding a lot with Shawn here, and it made it seem like she was going to potentially break away from the other Rebas in order to side with Shawn, but then she just doesn't go along with it. She votes out Shawn without too much of an explanation there. Now, yes, obviously we got the whole like sefue stuff and how she would have been the boot there, but I still feel like this was a mostly bad look for J Maya. She doesn't get her way here. And plus, she is so being wrong, where she is so insistent that Sefue has an idol, completely buying the lie that she was told last episode, which we know for a fact is a lie. So I feel like that's also a bad look. And again, I feel like based off the edit that she's gotten beforehand, I just don't see how she wins the game. But again, she did get more content here than Brando, which was enough to have her here number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and I did move up this person slightly, considering that they got a bit more positive content here, even though at the end of the day, I still feel like they're in a losing battle, and here we have Bruce. And obviously, Bruce has this big moment right after the swap where he ends up on the same beach as where Tika was on 44, and he got a moment there talking about how emotional it is, and that he's ready to make new memories, which was a pretty nice touch there. Didn't necessarily need to show that. But again, I feel like a lot of it's more the same. I will also say that the one positive is that we do see him in this episode start to pick up on Coutura's rivalry with him. He knows that she's onto him and that this was the last straw for him and Coutura, which obviously could be setting up the fact that this rivalry will be coming to a head. But I'm going to be honest, I still think Bruce is going to be on the losing side of this. I still feel like Coutura is probably going to get her way here, which is a pretty big knock there. So obviously, I don't really have Bruce as a winner contender, but I feel like the fact that he got a bit more positive content here in this big episode was enough to have him above these other people, which is why he is here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we have someone that I've continued to remain consistent on throughout the season, even though they are technically moving down a spot from last week, and here we have Julie. And I feel like Julie has been kind of middling in my view, where the one positive to her is that she has been getting consistent content. She has gotten at least one confessional in every episode, which is definitely more than I can say about some of the people that we already talked about. But with that said, I just feel like a lot of it just isn't that spectacular, where she is like talking about how J Maya is like breaking away from Shawn and that she's not sure if she can change J Maya's mind, but Shawn brings good energy around camp. But obviously, she does technically get her way there by J Maya ultimately voting out Shawn by the end of it, but I don't really think Julie gets much credit for that. Like, I feel like it's just due to outside circumstances that lead to J Maya and really the rest of the tribe voting that way. So I think I can't really give Julie too much credit for that. And really outside of that, I feel like a lot of her storyline like just hasn't really come to fruition, where she is getting like a lot of these like baseline content. However, I feel like it's not really translating to an overarching story where we did get that establishment early on about her wanting to hide the fact that she's a lawyer. And yes, while it's good that she's getting consistent content, I feel like the other people just have more setup for future storylines or a potential win compared to her, which is why I do have her here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have someone that I've actually moved up on each week, and they are technically a bit higher here. Though with the promo coming for next week, I'm not entirely sure what to make of them. But here we have Jake. And I feel like this was another pretty good episode for Jake. He gets some good content post-swap, particularly with him connecting with Caleb, talking about wanting to work with him. He talked about like wanting to feel bad for Caleb since he's all alone. He wants to help him out as it's a chance to build connections. He's not willing to play Bellows strong and that he needs to be willing to jump ship, which for me is definitely an indication that he could be an integral force in this rivalry that'll play out between Coutura and Bruce, though we'll have to see which side he ultimately takes there. However, with that said, I still have two reservations about him. One is, again, his premiere wasn't particularly great. I feel like he definitely could have gotten a lot better edit there. But also, I do want to at least factor in the promo for next episode, where it shows to be that it's becoming a thing for him to like get sick, where it does seem like he's gonna like have like another episode here. And while that could just be like, again, just one-off things, so sort of like fake outs, the fact that they're having another one like isn't particularly great. Like, it does make me a bit worried for Jake, like in real life per se. So like I do have to at least factor that. But I still feel like Jake's been on an upward trajectory here these last couple of episodes, which is why he's here number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and while this person's episode wasn't that bad per se, I'm just becoming more solidified in what I think this person is going to be. But here we have Caleb. And again, I think at this point, it's pretty clear that Caleb's just there to be like a big threat. They'll be taken out like post-merge. And while this wasn't a bad episode for him, I mean, we got a lot of complexity from him on his new tribe. Like, he is shown like being on the bottom at first, but then working his way up. He's shown building connections and gathering information. We get talk about him like hoping to like exploit some cracks in the future. Like, there's definitely a lot of good game talk from him. But again, I'm still kind of stuck on him because, like, yes, while he is getting a lot of game talk, he's getting almost no personal content. Like, he's just a very one-note game bot type of character that very rarely wins the game, especially in Modern Survivor. But even beyond that, you also have, like, his storyline with Emily. Like, he talks about at the beginning of the episode how his investment in Emily has paid off. And obviously, Emily now is a much better player to where she is now the main character of the season. And while I could say that that's a positive in the sense that he is shown having this positive relationship with Emily, I read it more as Emily's going to be the one to take him out, where she eventually becomes such a good player that she ends up outgrowing him and sort of like overcoming her master in a lot of ways. I can kind of see that storyline playing out for him as well. But again, I feel like a lot of this episode was me just getting more solidified in Caleb being like this big threat, more so than a true winner contender, which is why he's here number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and kind of like Julie, I've remained very consistent on this person all season, but here we have Austin. And Austin in a lot of ways is similar to Julie, like he's gotten a confessional in each episode, and I did kind of knock him to a degree due to it seeming circumstantial, but also brought them up due to his very clear connection with Drew. And I feel like this episode was kind of more the same, where he gets a lot of content like working alongside Drew, narrating like the fact that they are in the power position, that they are the ones that need to pull in Emily as a swing vote, how they have all these advantages, and that they see Emily as an opportunity, not so much as the easy target to begin with. And that how cutting Emily would create a tie like between the Rebas and the Bellows. So again, like a lot of it's pretty standard stuff. Like, again, nothing that really props him up into winner contention. But again, I feel like he's still going to be like a major supporting character in the season due to his relationship with Drew, which makes me feel like he's going to be in it for at least a bit. But again, I feel like the fact that we haven't seen more from him, like really stepping it up and making him seem more of an individual that'll eventually like separate himself from Drew and overtake him, makes me feel like that Austin's probably not going to win by the end of it. But again, compared to everyone else, he's had a more consistent presence. He's had more of a role within the story, which is why he is here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and I very much debated putting this person lower as they have a very similar flaw to a player we already talked about. But I feel like this person's edit before this point was better than that person's. But here we have Kendra, and I feel like Kendra is someone that I've kind of been going down on recently, as again, she has had a very quiet squap episode here, and even her episode 3 wasn't that particularly notable, which does make me a bit worried that she's just going to fade into the background. And considering this episode in particular, the fact that we don't see her perspective on what should be a pivotal point, like with Emily being there as a blatant swing vote, and considering that all the perspective was on Austin and Drew and pulling her over, makes Kendra look pretty bad here. And I feel like if they go to tribal, then Emily's probably going to side with Austin and Drew and in turn take out either her or Brando. Though to be fair, considering the edit up to this point, I wouldn't be surprised if they took out Brando over her. So I think that's at least something that I can give her. Plus I feel like her edit like in episodes 1 and 2 was at least solid enough to where it's still somewhat redeemable in my eyes. And that's a big reason why I have her as high as she is. Though the fact that she didn't get much in this episode is a knock, which is why I have her here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have someone that I'm still very conflicted on, to where this person has slid down for the second week in a row, and here we have Coutura. And I am starting to get a bit worried about Coutura here, as literally all of her content is about this Bruce rivalry, which I did kind of excuse at first, but I feel like now, like, it's kind of becoming a bit one note, as if it's her main storyline across the season, and sort of like forgetting a lot of the stuff that she talked about earlier. But at the same time, like, we're starting to see people like a Bruce catch on to the fact that Coutura is on to him, and that we could see this rivalry come to a head relatively soon. So I am still very conflicted about all this. But I feel like one positive for her is we do see her telling Caleb her side of the story, and we do see Caleb like marinate over it to where it is still possible that she will come out on top here. In fact, I kind of expect her to be on the winning side of this. But I worry that with the amount of focus that she has gotten on the storyline to the expense of everything else, I do worry that it could lead to her being a bit one-dimensional. Though I guess one other thing to point out is the Ellie and Gabler comparison, like where that storyline like was a big factor and Gabler ended up winning the season by the end of it. So I can still see her being on that path to a degree, though I can't really have her the number 5 this week. Now moving on to number 4, and I actually have moved up on this person as I feel like this was a pretty strong episode for them, though I still have some of the worries that I mentioned from them before, and here we have Kelly. And I really punished Kelly last week as I was worried by the way that some of her game talk was being framed. And even in this episode, like, while we don't really see that negative framing as much, she is still talking about being in the middle to the point where, kind of like Coutura, it is her main storyline here. Though at the same time, like, I feel like unlike Coutura, I feel like Kelly is at least being presented as a more rational player where, again, she is talking about like her position, and I feel like she's talking about it in a pretty level-headed way. I like the way that she talks about how she handles Bruce, where she needs to keep an eye on him, but for now she's willing to work with him. She also talks about like Bruce pulling in Caleb, like recognizes that, but at the same time, like questions whether or not Bruce is her number 1. I feel like this was definitely a better episode for Kelly than the last episode. But again, I still have some of those same worries, like the fact that she is, again, focusing so much on being in the middle. We haven't gotten as much personal content from her as of late. And there's still a world where all this middle talk will eventually come to a head and she could eventually screw it up. But again, I feel like she came off as a more rational player this time, somewhat a bit more level-headed, which was enough to jump her up this high on the list, especially considering how I feel about the other players and just not being as high on them. But again, it was those worries that kept her here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and kind of like Caleb, I feel like this wasn't necessarily a bad episode for this person, but I feel like I'm becoming more concrete in my opinions of them, and here we have Drew. And again, I feel like this episode just further cemented to me the fact that Drew is going to be the big character of the season, the king of the season. Like, we see him like really get all his perspective on this new SWAT tribe, getting a lot of the perspective of him like pulling over Emily, like recognizing the value that she brings to his game moving forward. He calls her a rational person and that she should know that it makes sense for her to work with him. So obviously that's pretty good. And again, I feel like he's just laying his pieces, putting together his army so that he can be the king of the game. I feel like that storyline is pretty clear at this point. But again, I feel like it's just more of the same. I feel like it's just going to eventually get to the point where he is going to be the big king of the season and that someone's going to come in and slay him at the end. We've seen this before, and I feel like with me feeling this confident that this is going to happen, I feel like I had to reflect that in my own rankings. But again, I feel like compared to the other people, he has more of a storyline there. I have more confidence in him having longevity, but by the end, like, what's that really going to amount to? So because of that, I do have to leave him here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and we have another player that I'm a bit conflicted on, but I feel like this was still a mostly good episode for them, and here we have D. Now I know some people are down on D after this episode, and even myself, I do have some questions about her, particularly with that whole scene of her searching Shawn's bag. I feel like the way that was presented was kind of interesting, where on one hand it does make her come off as a bit mean-spirited with her talking about how Shawn knows that he's at the bottom. But at the same time, I mean, like, she isn't necessarily presented as being in the wrong here. Like, I feel like the edit itself was not presenting that as a negative thing, even though it kind of makes her kind of unlikable. So I think that's at least something to consider for me. But again, I feel like she's kind of one of these players that doesn't have as many red flags as the other players that we talked about. Where again, Coutura's red flag is her hyper focus on Bruce. Kelly's is some questionable things about her game talk, plus the fact that she has no personal content. And I feel like Drew is very blatantly being set up to be taken out towards the end. I feel like Dee still has arguably the most well-rounded edit of the group here, to where like I could see her making a deep run and just her being a main character. Though at the same time, like people could knock her to a degree for like not voting correctly here, where she was the one vote for sefue. Though at the same time, I feel like that can easily be explained next episode. I do feel like Dee's still in a solid spot here, though obviously we'll see what happens next episode and how a lot of her decisions from there are kind of explained in the next episode. But I feel like for now, I still feel very confident in Dee's chances, which is why she's here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Survivor 45 right now is Emily. And admittedly, this is probably the one that I had the most trouble with, because on one hand, I can't deny anymore. I can't deny the fact that Emily is essentially the main character of the season. We have gotten so many episodes to highlight her perspective, and it's clear that she has probably one of the most concrete storylines out of anyone here, where a lot of it is about her growing as a player, and a lot of it is about her embracing her authentic self, which, considering what I talked about more in the premiere, is a major theme across the season. So it's clear that Emily, in a lot of ways, encapsulates the theme of the season. And again, the storyline is her growing as a player, where she came off initially as someone that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, but through her relationship with Caleb is able to grow and to be more open. And a lot of it does feel genuine, more so than her like just doing this like out of game necessity. So I think in a lot of ways, like I can't really deny anymore. I feel like compared to everyone else, I feel like Emily is being set up the most to be like a main character of the season. Though with that said, I still have my reservations, sort of similar to what I talked about in previous rankings. I think one of the biggest issues I have is some trends that we've seen in other seasons. Like on one hand, I could see her having a journey at it, where she is someone that is able to eventually grow, make some big moves along the way, but is eventually taken out towards the end. Like we've seen this before, people like Yao Man from Fiji, or even Suri from Survivor Panama. So I think that's a big worry there. You also have the potential for her to drop off post-merge, like we've seen this with Carolyn from 44, where in the pre-merge we saw her having this full-out winners edit in the pre-merge, but in the post-merge we started to like see her like take a back seat. We started to see like ways in which like we start to learn why she eventually loses the game. And I feel like Emily could very easily end up on a similar trajectory here. Though with that said, I feel like compared to Carolyn, Emily is shown being taken more seriously by the other players. Like, we even saw Drew in this episode talk about her being rational. So I think that's another big pro for her that kind of helped me like get over the edge here. Where even with me still having a lot of these concerns, and obviously if they get reflected in the post-merge, I will start to reflect that in my future rankings. I feel like for now, I feel like Emily is just the person that I feel the most confident in. And yes, well, you could say that's hypocritical of me to do that, considering I talked about Drew and Caleb earlier as fitting these clear archetypes that don't win. I feel like Emily is still going to be the main character of the season. I feel like out of all those people, I feel like Emily's the most likely to actually get to the very end of the game. And depending on how her later edit goes, I think there's still room for her to win by the end. Like, it's not necessarily a guarantee that she'll drop off the same way as other runner-ups have in recent seasons. So I think it's with all that makes me kind of accept the fact that I kind of have to have Emily at number 1. I mean, compared to Dee, I feel more confident in Emily to win the game at this point. I could see a world where Dee drops off. I could see a world where a lot of these other people drop off. But I feel like with Emily, I kind of just come around to her being the top contender for now, which is why I have her here at number 1. And there we go. That'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Really helps out with the channel. And I'll be back again next week to update the Power Rankings again, so you can stay tuned for that. I am still covering Amazing Race 35 as well as Big Brother 25, so you can expect weekly Power Rankings of those shows. I am now on Patreon, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And if you haven't already, you can also join the Discord server by clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.